This is the Wingman. Do your pre-flight checks, get your helmet on and strap in because we're going 9Gs here. We're taking you to new heights in business. Welcome to the Wingman. I'm Brad Barker. We've got a very special guest today. It's somebody who I think is a great wingman in the industry. It's Rob Nankervis. Welcome, Rob.
Thanks, Brad. Great to be here.
Yeah. Now, Rob, you've got a very extensive CV. We've got you as a business advisor, business coach, advisor, speaker, and soon to be a author.
Yep, book went to the publisher this week, so that was great to get that off my desk and onto his.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations on that. That's no small effort.
Yeah, no, it's great to do.
Yeah. Now, today I just want to talk to you. I've got a few things that I'd love to talk to you about. I want to talk to you about the book that is coming out. Sure. Also, I'd love to talk to you about business strategy, how you go about helping other companies, and what you do there. And now, Rob, I've known you for a little while now, and it seems like our conversations are always very interesting, and you seem to be on a great journey yourself, which you seem to like to bring a lot of your clients on with you. Yeah. Now, Rob, you focus a lot on, say, medium-sized companies.
Yeah, that's right. They're normally sort of founder-owner owned, and they're what I'd call the mid-tier, mostly more than 20 employees. They're in that middle size between them. They're obviously bigger than the SME types, startups and small enterprises, but we cut out before they become bureaucracies.
Ah, interesting. All right. Now, you got a background as an accountant, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you go in and do accounting with them, or?
No, desperately try to avoid that, actually. It's my journey. I'm grateful that I had the commercial background, and what that led me into was doing consulting, and the consulting got me into advisory, and advisory ended up leading me into coaching. So it was just an interesting sort of start to the progression for me.
Great. So one of the things that I notice you do a lot is you hold regular meetings with your clients to review where they've got up to since you last met with them. And so it seems like there's an emphasis on strategy and execution and delivery.
Yeah, that's right. Look, the insight that we have is that lots of people will have their strategic retreat. Often they'll go away for a day or two once a year. They'll get the team together, and honestly, I think if you talk to anyone 3 weeks afterwards, they wouldn't be able to remember much of what they'd done, and potentially there'll be a large document shaped out of it. But strategy falls over a lot, and it's basically because it doesn't get rolled into any sort of disciplined execution. And so what we do in the retained coaching programs is, out of those 1 or 2 day annual retreats, is drive that down from a multi-year plan to an annual plan to a quarterly plan, and to a quarterly plan by individual leader. And then 3 months later, we're back checking in on that. How did the quarter go for the business, and how did we go individually with delivering on the accountabilities that we each took out of that meeting? And so that cadence rolls on each quarter, and monthly in between. Then I'm checking in with the most senior leader in a one-on-one coaching call, an executive coaching call with them, and I expect that they will be doing the same with their direct reports.
So how do you get buy-in for that? Like, because clients that engage with you say, "Hey, we'd love to bring you in to help us with our strategy." You'd have your retreat or your session or whatever, and then it's like, okay, now I'm going to come back in 3 months and I'm going to see how you're going according to that.
Yep.
That requires some buy-in, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. And the interesting thing to me, to be honest, was how quickly people do buy into it. I part of me thought, they're just going to say, God help us, one more meeting. We don't need this. Yeah. But the reality is, if you make those things very focused and functional, and they get results out of it, then they can let other less valuable parts of their meeting rhythms go. And in fact, a client recently told me that their daily huddles, for example, 12 to 15 minute meetings they've implemented, they implemented that at their busiest time of their year. And he said, I'm grateful that we did that, because we really needed that connection between each of us as leaders to make sure important things got done. And so for me, it's about making sure that they have these meetings that they've closely correlated with what their strategy is trying to achieve, that we've got a clear understanding of what the critical numbers are that they're trying to drive to in the business, and that those meetings are checking in on those things, and they, in that sense, provide an opportunity for course correction. It's like that idea of, if you're sailing from Australia to New Zealand, you're going to be on course hardly any of the time. You'll be buffeted by the wind and the waves, and you'll be darting left and right. But the reality is, if you've got the destination in mind and you're checking on that a lot, you can course correct. And so this is what this regular cadence of meetings helps people to do.
That's good. I like that. So if you were to take on a new client and they said, no, Rob, we just want you for this one meeting. We just need a bit of oversight and strategy. Is that someone you'd work with?
Yeah, look, there are a number of clients each year who do that. They want to either, because they want to check you out and see how you work, and so engage you for 1 or 2 days in the first instance, or that they have their own rhythms that they're comfortable with at the moment, that they just want to have a moment in time where they get their strategy set. I'll certainly work with some of those, but about 85% of my business is retained clients who realise through experience that they haven't had that discipline and rigour to have that accountability and focus and so on. And if to take your term, my wingman role there is to help bring them that discipline. And the other thing that it does, that I've had feedback from the clients on, is that with somebody outside their firm running it, it lets all of the leadership team, including the owner and founder, participate actively in that meeting, rather than one of them have to run it.
So, Rob, can I ask what got you into this? I mean, you when you studied, you went through you studied accounting and business, and what actually got you into this to begin with?
Yeah, look, it's the interesting insight was that there was actually still a lot of failure organisationally, and a lot of the work I was doing in my commercial roles and then later in consulting was with big and slow corporate bureaucracies, and I personally didn't find that very fulfilling. And I saw the mid-tier and how substantial it was, and I thought, here's an area of businesses that aren't terribly well served, that have actually got a massive opportunity to contribute to the economy. I don't think bureaucracies do that, and the truth is that small 1 and 2 person businesses are often really good at feeding themselves, but they don't have necessarily the scale that can make a big economic impact. And I certainly see that with the mid-tier firms. With 4 businesses that I've dealt with in the last couple of weeks, they're looking at multiplying in the next 3 years between 2 and 3 times in size. And these are businesses that have all got, 80, one case 240. They're substantial businesses already looking to significantly multiply in terms of their headcount and their impact. So
yeah, no, I mean, Look, it's one thing for a company that's, say, 100,000 to go up to 100,000 people to go up to 200,000 people. There's probably not a massive difference there, other than extra office space, right? They'd have the systems to accompany that. But if you get a small size company that's 80 people and they're going to go to 240 people, that's a massive change for them.
Yeah, it is, and you end up going through what we call the valleys of death on the way to this, because what invariably happens in that growth journey is that you'll get to a certain point where there's a comfort level, and it might be at, say, 15 people, where you can really get everyone around the one boardroom table. You may just have one leader running it. And then, of course, with scale, you go to 50 people, you won't have one person who can lead 50 people directly. So you've got another layer of people put in, so that has a financial impact on the business, of course. You need some different systems. And then you scale on from there, and people, for example, might find, we've had a bookkeeper, but now we're a $50 million business. We've run out of runway with a bookkeeper. We need a CFO or an accountant and a better system, and our CRMs, MailChimp won't do us anymore, and things like that. And so it's that sort of journey where people have to keep reinvesting in the business. And it probably goes back to your question about strategy of what decisions do you have to make to take you on that journey.
What has to happen to a company for them to want to bring you in?
Look, the most common term in one variation or another is that people are stuck. And so often they've been on this journey, they've been trying to grow by themselves, and for one reason or other, they've reached an impasse. And what we tend to say in the coaching world is that performance equals potential less interference. And so part of your role as an advisor and coach is to say, well, help people shine a torch on those areas of interference and ask them the sorts of questions and get them to go through the exercises to actually unpack those things and agree to what the priorities will be to work down.
Gotcha. That's great. So, Rob, what are some of the stories that you would have, what are some of the success stories you would have seen over the years? I mean, you've been doing this for a while now, so surely you'd have a few really good success stories.
Look, there are lots of clients have done some really interesting things, and it's one of the great privileges, to be honest, in doing this work, that you get to be on the journey with them. And people, interestingly, want different things out of it. For some people, it's about the growth. For some, they're stuck on profitability and they want more of that. For others, it's about valuation. And possibly the thing that interested me most is that how do we make the thing easier to run for the leader? And so, strangely, that's not something often that's readily quantifiable. But you go from seeing people who are quite stressed in their leadership role, and I get to see probably more of that than sometimes even their own family does in my role as their coach, because we have some pretty direct conversations about what's going on for them. And to be able to be in a position where you can have some influence and support them in their leadership role in running their own business. Obviously a great responsibility, but enormous privilege as well, that the people are humble enough to bring you in to do that. And so to see them getting the results then from taking the actions that they need to take and showing that courage and so on is it's a wonderful experience. Yeah. But it's great to see them get the results out of it as well. So.
Why do you think they're stressed, Rob?
I think the interesting thing is that mostly these folks have been a functional expert in the thing that they do, whether that's being an allied health professional, whether it's being an engineer, whatever it is in all the different industries that I've worked with, they normally come off the tools in some sense.
They're specialists in something in particular, right?
That's right. So they've been in a sense the technician in their industry, and now they're leading a business where they've got other technicians work with them. And so their role actually changes, and instead of being on the tools where they may have had a certain level of, well, obviously skill and comfort, they've moved into a less comfortable role as a leader of a business that does that. And the other thing that I think is a stress for them is that a lot of these people are type A driven entrepreneurs, and they are creators. They are great at getting things off the ground, ideating, and if you like, that shuttle lift-off phase is their bit of excitement. Yep. When things get more into that phase where you're orbiting, that's less exciting for the entrepreneur. Yeah. And the in a sense, the philosophical challenge for them is, how do I stay interested in my own business without meddling in it and keep knocking it off course? Yeah. Which their teams tell me they are prone to try and do, because that's the brain and the mindset and the drive often of the entrepreneur. So that's in a sense partly a stress for them as well. So part of my role is to help them with that clarity to say, let's understand what the entrepreneur's brain is doing to them, and where they're trying to take this thing on the journey, and feed enough of that in the process that there are, say, new things that they're doing. For one of my clients, he's a really driven guy and a real innovator. So he's a CEO, but he's kind of the chief innovator in his business too, and that feeds his entrepreneurial spirit. And so, but around that, we have to have a business that's, in a sense, quite a lot more mechanical as well, because that's what keeps the rhythm going, and keeps delivering to his clients.
So, Rob, you said I like to go in and unpack the entrepreneur's brain and then express it. How do you go about doing that with the team members or with the entrepreneur?
Yeah, so there are certainly some diagnostics that we have to understand what some of the challenges are that are going on in the business. And look, one of the things that I normally start my sessions with is to say, what's in the way right now? You know, what's the stone in your shoe? What are the big issues? If you were to say, think about doubling your business in the next 3 years, what's stopping you doing that? Why wouldn't you do that this quarter, this year? What's in the road? And that's a way of sparking a conversation about the things that they all see are the challenges in their business.
Yeah. So you go and unpack the problems that they perceive to be having, and is it sort of like, let's talk to the elephant in the room, let's get these things out of the way, sort of thing. So is there any other way you go about unpacking their brain?
Oh, look, there are different exercises that we run, and so, for example, you know, one of the issues might be that the leaders are overwhelmed, as they often are when you're scaling. They get to a point where they're all overworked until they get more people in, and then it goes back to normal until they're all overworked again. And so one of the exercises we run is to say, look, how many top performers do you have in the business versus non-top performers?
Interesting. How do you measure that?
Look, we do it as a bit of a wet finger in the air exercise in the first instance, but it's amazing the clarity when you get a whole leadership team doing this independently, how much commonality of view there is amongst them. And so we look at, say, you know, what are how productive and performance oriented are your team versus how values aligned are they? And you end up with a little 2x2 matrix that gives you a sense of where the weighting of their team is. And of course, if they're feeling overwhelmed and you might say, well, here it is. You're seriously underweight in the number of top performers you've got on your team, and you're carrying too many of the others.
So, Robert, it sounds like you go in and you unpack information, and then you hold up metrics to say this is what's going on with your business. Is it? Have I sort of understood that right?
And look, part of this is getting them to enunciate what their own metrics are. You know, how will we know we're doing well here? You know, is it the number of forward orders we've got? Is it the number of patient treatments we're doing? What's our multiplying number?
So you don't come in and impose metrics on them to say you should be measuring these things? Or?
No, look, the interesting thing actually is that, you know, in their industry, they're all the industry experts. I'll pretty quickly learn, you know, the industry language of all the different industries that I coach in. But those guys are now and always will know a lot more about their industry and what drives it than I do.
Yeah.
My role as their guide and coach is to test them on different things and check what makes sense. And are there other things that they should be measuring that actually tell them the truth about where their business is and where it needs to go.
Yeah.
They might need to measure something else to advance the cause, because sometimes the typical industry metric just doesn't get you there in terms of a substantial growth factor in your business.
All right. So you go in, you get a map of the business or the entrepreneur's brain, the owner's brain, and you get that sort of out to the rest of the team so they understand where he's coming from or she's coming from. And then you go in and look at the metrics by which they measure themselves, and then hold that up to them. And then you'll, just so I understand, right? And then you do a workshop with them after that.
Yeah, that's right.
And then you come away with a strategy and a plan on how we're going to go about it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And then you hold them to account.
Yep. Yeah, and so the metrics they'll in a sense be able to tell me how we're going now, because what you're really doing is saying what's current state in terms of what's in your way, how's the business performing right now, and what's your view of the future. What could this be? In a sense it's a visioning exercise to say how big, how great could this business be, and then you're really saying, well, to get from A to B, what's that going to take?
Yeah.
In a journey sense, and what's that strategy to
dollars, resources, energy, effort, etc.
Yeah, that's right. And it's really saying, you know, are there some key differentiating themes or streams of activity that are going to help take you from, say, being the 25 million business to the 75 or the 50 to the 150? So in that case, where's the extra 100 coming from?
Yeah.
What do you have to do to get that? And so it could be the dollars. It could be saying we need another 500 people. Great. What do we have to do to find and feed 500 more people?
Yeah. And house.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
right. So it's all those things, and where will the resources need to drop in along the way to feed that, and so on. So,
Yeah, that's brilliant, Rob. So look, you've basically built a career based off this sort of thing, and now you've put all that into a book.
Yeah, well, the book will come out at the end of April, and we'll actually officially launch it in May.
That's great, and it's called
Propelling Performance.
Thank you. I had that written down. Propelling Performance. Excellent. So, and now in that book, what are some of the aspects that you're talking about?
So my insight on it is that it's drawing on my experience, and it's really an overview of the way that I work with clients. So my bigger goal is to help 5,000 businesses. There's about 50,000 businesses in Australia with more than 20 staff. I said, well, what if I could help 10% of those? So the book is a tool to help me reach more people that I can reach in my normal coaching practice. And so I wanted to capture in there some of the things that I've found helpful in the work that I've done with clients. And the main insight from it is that there are 3 spheres of energy which a leader manages. They're really the spiritual sphere, which is the vision, purpose, and values of the business. What does the business believe? There's if you like, the intellectual sphere. How does the business think? That's really about its strategy, the business model to deliver the strategy, and thinking about the risks associated with that strategy. And then there's the physical sphere of energy, which is really about, if you like, the bones and the muscle groups and the tendons that actually bring the physicality of the business in terms of the people, processes, and structures that will execute the strategy. And so I see these as 3 intersecting spheres of energy that the leader is at the middle of, and it's really the leader's role and the reason for the propelling performance. There are 3 propeller blades that join these spheres together, and I think this is the part that a lot of people miss in whether strategy works or not.
Yeah, interesting. So Rob, why are beliefs important in business?
Look, I think the interesting thing is that probably going back 100 years to the factory model of Ford and so on, there was a huge tilt towards execution. How do we just get much better in our factory mindset, people as pawns in a game, and let's just have a huge factory and just get super productive. So that model went on for decades. In the 1950s, this whole strategy revolution came about, and there's since been dozens of iterations of how to frame strategy. And that was, if you like, people wanted to go from just doing better to saying, well, how do we get better thinking inside our business? And I think there's probably been a reflection that there's been a lot of strategic failure. Somewhere only between 10 and 20% of strategies are seen to actually succeed.
Interesting.
And so why the failure? And part of it is the piece I explained at the start of our discussion, which is that people don't properly articulate their strategy into what they're going to do to execute it.
Right.
But I also don't think that strategy is sufficiently informed from the belief system. And so I think the next piece of battleground, if you like, is going into the belief system much more strongly and saying, what do we believe as a business?
Yeah.
Why do we do what we do in a purpose sense? What are the values and behaviours by which we'll conduct ourselves? And when we have that as a background, what's our vision for what we could do, for the dent we could make in the world? And I think that sense of, if you like, that spiritual foundation or that belief foundation for a business helps give it a left and right of arc in terms of the permissions that it can then have when it goes out into the market.
So do you have an example of what a positive belief and a negative belief are?
I think more than positive or negative, it's about aligned beliefs. So it's about saying, what are the beliefs that are true for the organisation? What are those handful of rules that we live by in our own business? my sense of it is that a lot of people, they'll go out and say develop their values by Googling world's best values, and they'll come up with 5 to 10 values for their business, which are unrelated to how people actually behave.
Yeah.
So the disbelief or the disconnect is not that the values aren't appropriate, they're just not appropriate for them.
Yeah.
And so people say, this isn't us.
So how do you help them form their own beliefs? And I mean, that's the first step, right? And then you've got to get alignment with the rest of the business. How do you go about that?
Well, I think there's two sides to it. One is there's a strong guide to this, I think, from what the owner, founder, CEO believes, because they will what they believe in will and should strongly inform what the business believes. The other part of it is that I run through an exercise where we talk about, at our best, what do we see around here in terms of behaviour? And I just get them to come up with words, and we tend to just whack all those out on sticky notes, and we look for clusterings of things. And what we try to do in that process is to say, look, this won't be us all the time, but if somebody, and Jim Collins in his work calls this, a mission to Mars exercise. So if somebody, if the Martians came and met one of your staff, they don't speak English, what would they make of what they see in the behaviours? And so we normally like to capture 5 clusters of behaviours that are represented by a value, and probably more importantly than the value sentence itself is capturing those behaviours that will tell us that value is alive.
Yeah.
And so this is the gap.
This is where the metrics come in, right?
Well, it can be metrics, but it's often those sets of individual behaviours that will actually tell us. You can have a behaviour like, people will say, etch in glass at the front of their wheel, respect. Oh, that's good. Well, what does that mean?
Yeah. How do you know somebody's doing that?
And so what we like people to do is maybe capture 3 to 5 sentences or phrases that reflect the sorts of behaviours that we'll see in our business that tell us that we have respect, or that we have teamwork, or that we have care for our customer, that we really believe in safety, and those sorts of things. And so that, and this is part of going back to my earlier point about one of the things the owners really want is to unload themselves. And if you have a belief system that is more self-regulating because the team get that set of behaviours is about all of us, and they can hold each other to account rather than relying on the single boss to have to pull people up all the time, for example. So
it's more a business that's run by a belief system, which isn't necessarily this micromanaged thing of you need to do this because I've said this. It's like these are the underlying beliefs that we have, and therefore beliefs drive our behaviour, and as a result, it takes more pressure off the boss.
Yep, correct. And so these are the ways that we behave. It's effectively it's culture. This is how we do things around here, and it becomes a filter then for who comes into the business. So I'm a strong advocate of clients having a screening call that includes some of these fundamental beliefs, because if somebody doesn't believe what you believe, you don't want them inside your business. You don't need them.
Yeah.
And so because
so what would be an example of
a
call? How would that go?
Oh, so in that 20-minute screening call, like it's about understanding what one of their fundamental beliefs or values is for that business, what one of the behaviours.
Yeah.
And so it could be around being a self-starter.
Yep.
And so that they might be a business that's got very low, very flat structure, low overheads, but they really need the team to be action-oriented action takers and so on. So you'd be asking a question around, so Brad, tell us about a time when you've had to really lead from the front and take action to get something going. What's a project that you took on your own?
Yeah, so scenario-based questions.
Yeah, so this is not about mysteries and look, if I'd had that situation, I would have done this. This is saying, is this what this person actually does?
Gotcha.
What's their actual internal operating system? And it's not saying they're a bad person. It just might be they don't fit in your in your business through the behaviours that you expect.
So so these beliefs then, I take it, build the culture of the business as well.
Yep. And
So have you seen some big cultural changes with businesses that you've been working with?
Oh, look, it tightens things up, because what it helps people to do is to easily spot people who don't belong.
Yeah.
And the feedback I get is that there's been a huge friction cost in businesses carrying too many people who don't share the belief system of the organisation.
That's interesting. So there's no right or wrong with a belief system or necessarily with a culture. It's more, do you have cohesion within the team that work there?
Yeah, is it internally consistent?
Yeah.
And so you can have, you might be a great operator in your functional role, but that doesn't mean you'll work out well for us. And so I've made it clear to clients, look, this doesn't mean they're a bad person. It might just be they just don't fit in either the role you've got them in or in the business you're in.
Well, have you seen a company that their culture is actually undermining the way that they're performing?
Oh yeah, look, that's it's more common than we'd all like.
Yeah.
That there are misfits in organisations, and it's partly because in the first instance they haven't been very clear about what their values are.
Yeah.
And secondarily, they're not holding people to account for the behaviours.
So, okay, so you've worked with some companies that have culturally haven't been aligned, but have you had companies that culturally it's not helping them get to where they want to go to, but also they may have a belief system that is actually undermining them as well. Have you come across that at all?
Look, an interesting one that I've seen in a couple of cases recently, it's where great founders have, over a couple of decades, created really good businesses, but there's an underlying culture that's a bit complacent.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had to do some work in those cases to create some more energy and drive around them, because they realise that in the style that they've brought to the business, they've created a very nice place to work, but it's lost a bit of its edge as it's scaled, because they've got a little bit further away from the execution disciplines and so on. So some of that, so culturally, it's become too comfy a place to work.
Right. And so they're not executing on what they say they're going to do and follow through on it. And is there an underlying belief with it?
Look, I think what it means is that there's probably some beliefs that are being lived that aren't as helpful to the organisation as the ones that they need. And so that's always the interesting test is, what do we say, but what do we actually do?
Yeah.
And so it's these behaviours in use. And what we like clients to do is say, well, if these are your values and your beliefs, how are you going to bring those to life? And so for one of I like people to capture the highlights of their quarter, for example. So how can you feed those highlights back and connect them to one of your values, so that you can you're reinforcing the fact that these values are alive. And so in the case of Dimple, the podiatry firm that I was coaching, they had a strong bias towards care. They wanted to impact 1 million elders. And so one of the things that they did is they implemented what they called a fairy dust fund. And what the fairy dust fund was about was allowing everybody who went out as a podiatrist to see an elder in an aged care residency, was that they could spend up to $50 to do something to make that elder happy.
Okay.
And so if I found that Brad loved Dean Martin, in my discussion with him while I'm doing the podiatry work, without asking anybody, I could go and buy a couple of CDs and bring them to you next time that I came, or bring you a bunch of flowers, or it didn't matter, no question. And it was about demonstrating that aspect of care and making that alive, so that not only so think about the power of this. It was aligned with their purpose and their belief system. It was in service of their customers and what they needed, and it was truly unifying for the staff, because they felt they were doing something purposeful and beyond just effectively cutting toenails and doing the podiatry work that was the functional task they're actually there to do.
Yeah. But
their real task was obviously much bigger than that in the care of the the elder in the aged care setting.
Yeah, that's a great story. So, Rob, do you ever like you come across a lot of leaders, right? And do you ever find that that the leader culturally, he's got an idea in his head, but it's not necessarily got down to the people beneath him or even the next tier down below that?
Yeah, and so one of the reasons that about 84% of businesses stay under 5 million turnover is the ability to scale and leverage everything.
Yeah.
Leverage the culture, leverage your assets, your people, your ideas, your processes, and so on. And so part of this, all these rhythms is to say, how do we get better at multiplying inside the business? And so one of the things I like people to do is when they've got that handful of personal goals that have and priorities that have come out of their quarterly session, is to go back to their own teams. Say you're in finance, you go back to the finance team and say, look, the business is chasing these 5 things. I'm on the hook for these 5 personally. And so I want to say to you, Brad, so knowing that, what handful of things are you going to help with this quarter?
Yeah.
And so what that means is that because you've got line of sight as to what the big goals are, you understand what the metrics are that the organisation's trying to hit. You know what your boss and the business are trying to get done. It's much easier for you to line up your performance against those things, so that the business benefit is that we've got everyone charging at the same hill, and the individual benefit to the staff is that they know that their efforts are actually counting for something. Yeah. And I think if you went into most organisations, you'd find a lot of lost people. Yeah. And so this is what we try and get around. But of course, that's not simple to do. And so in a practical sense, what I like my clients to do is have an iteration or 2 of these quarterlies themselves, get some comfort with the process, and then cascade it down. The power of it is it gets them to the point where they can let go of things like annual performance reviews and so on, because you and I are actually catching up every month against what you're going to do for the quarter.
Interesting.
So you can never be, going back to the analogy of sailing from here to New Zealand, you can never get far off course.
Yeah.
And so if you need some support from your leader, if you're stuck on something, if there's some great news come out, that's never far away from anyone's conscience in a regular rhythm.
Yeah, that's great, Rob. So, do you ever work with companies that have been acquired or acquire other companies?
Yeah, sure.
Look, I've worked with some myself, and the big thing, some of the reasons I see it not working is culturally they're misaligned.
Yep.
Right, and I'd say that personally, I think if they invested more in aligning culture, they'd actually have a lot more success with the business they've acquired or that's been acquired. Do you see that yourself?
Yeah, and so what we're very clear about in that context is that, and I spoke before about having these key strategic themes and differentiators that you're going to tackle over multiple years in sort of the larger goal quest. It may be that there's a growth piece in there which will be driven by acquisition, but they're extremely careful about how they acquire. And look, if there's not a strong cultural fit, it could be that acquisition will get passed by, or it could be that we'll be acquiring the contracts rather than the business. It could be that we're careful about which of the team get taken on, in a sense, in that HR due diligence phase about who's actually going to fit with this. And so, and there's also the part 2, which says what size organisation should you take over? If you're injecting, in a sense, another virus into your business, how big should that virus be? Yep. And the reality is it probably shouldn't be any more than 10 or maybe 20% of your current size, so that, the people you've got and the culture you've got and everything is already way bigger than what you're bringing in.
So have you ever recommended to another organisation not to acquire a different one based purely off culture?
No, look, that functionally that work gets done by their teams, and often they will get expert advisors who are doing the acquisition work for them. So they being clear about their cultural side and their strategies, they use that as guidance to the to those advisors.
So do you then get brought in after to help them align the culture?
Oh well, once they're in, they're all part of the one egg. That's right. That's right. So.
Yeah. Interesting. That's great. So.
But it's the same with new employees, by the way. I mean, whether or not it's through an acquisition, you have invariably senior leadership changes in organisations. So that's happening in clients all the time.
Yeah, no.
And they need that same sort of in sense of indoctrination to...
Yeah, and they're effectively new employees regardless.
Correct. Yep.
So, and they have to learn to function as part of that culture. So, that makes sense. So, the one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and this is something I noticed that you are talking about a bit lately, is focus. Focus in business at the moment. We seem to be quite distracted at the moment.
Yeah, look, it's you think about the last few months in Australia. There's a sense that the economy's slowed down. There's obviously been bushfires affected a number of areas, given the scale of that, and more recently coronavirus. What I'm saying to clients is, look, these things are all, there's obviously some facts and direct impacts of a number of these things, but let's understand what the actual risks are in here for your business, whether it's supply chain, whether it's, say in the case of coronavirus, is it staff returning that potentially you need to have isolated? So it's been quite pragmatic about what's going on with those things. And the thing I find is that a lot of people will readily be distracted by what's on social media or news feeds and so on, and that's super dangerous. And in fact, talking recently with 4 organisations that are looking to do some work with me, the amount of growth that these people are looking at is substantial. And so even in the current environment, there are a lot of businesses that are tuned up and are chasing substantial goals. I mean, these are all businesses with turnovers in the tens of millions of dollars that are looking to double or triple in the next 3 years, despite the current circumstances that we're in. So my take on that for clients and perhaps for listeners to this podcast is to just keep their eye on the ball about, where are they really taking their business. By definition, there'll be all sorts of buffetings that businesses will take. Let's keep our eyes on the horizon where we're heading for. Understand clearly what the actual risks are of some of these things, but for our staff to be the leader who is and is seen to be in control of those circumstances and making the appropriate decisions for the business rather than being distracted.
Yeah, it's that saying, I think Tony Robbins says, you get what you focus on.
Yep.
So if you want to focus on coronavirus, guess what? You're going to get it. No, hopefully you're not. Right? But anyway. Oh, that's great. That's a good message. Look, it's been wonderful chatting with you, Rob, and really grateful to have you on the show. And is it okay for viewers to hit you up on LinkedIn?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. And me too. If you enjoy the Wingman, feel free to hit us up on hit me up or Shad from Assertive Media on LinkedIn. It's been wonderful having you, and thanks for joining us. And I'd love to get you back on the show again sometime.
Great to be here, Brad, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.